Are there JavaScript best practices that are actually bad? And if so, what are the prime offenders?
I think it's not that there are practices that are actually bad, that are embraced by the community. Then again, one person's best practice is different from another's. As you learn best practices, the best thing to do with them is to learn about them and why they've become what they have. Several of them, and this is the topic of our talk later today, have come up at various times, and they're now not only no longer relevant, but they may in fact harm performance in newer browsers, and that may be what you care about.
So it's just keeping an eye on those.
Keeping an eye on it, and keep in mind that best practices exist on the internet, archived all over the place in web forums and whatever, and you may find some best practice that was said, oh, this is great, and it's IE6 they're talking about, and
Sure.
you're developing a mobile app.
Right.
So if you apply that rule, you could get in trouble. As far as a prime offender, one of the ones we'll talk about later is using array prototype join to do string concatenation as opposed to just embedding strings and using the plus operator. It does turn out that modern browsers have optimized for this, and the offenders were i.e. less than or equal to 8. So if you're doing mobile development and you take an old best practice, in this case you actually would harm your performance.
Interesting.
But it's relative. It's not going to hurt you.
Do you feel there's too much faith put in JavaScript libraries?
I think there's faith put in JavaScript libraries for good reason. It's a hard world, and the people who maintain them are on top of these things. That said, your case and your use case isn't a framework use case all the time. So yes, I think developers will tell their boss, oh, I'm using N library and now things are fast and better. And that may or may not be true. You should test these assumptions and build your own, look at your own application and really be sure that it's the right choice for what you're building. In the end, your user doesn't care what framework you use. Your user is using a tool to solve a problem, and if it works well, great.
How hard is it to create high-performance JavaScript? I mean, is it an advanced skill?
It is a combination of skill, hackery, and research. It is not the kind of thing where you can just apply basic computing principles like learned in CS classes and say, oh, this is always going to be true in JavaScript. It's mostly true. If you're writing a function and you analyze its performance using classic big O notation, you're doing the right thing for that case. But if you're looking at it and not realizing, oh, this is interacting with the browser DOM, you may be doing something that structurally would perform well in a test, but in reality won't perform well. So knowing that difference is really important. Knowing the target where you're deploying. It's not JavaScript necessarily on a server, it's JavaScript in a web browser. It's an engine that's running your code, and you need to make sure that engine and its environment is where performance matters.
So it's context, it's experience. There's really no other way to acquire that skill set than having gone through it.
It does help to read JavaScript libraries. I'll say whenever one comes out and it's maybe targeting a new kind of development, I learn by looking at that library, because maybe I've been developing for some set of use cases and I've been ignoring other sets of use cases like real-time versus static pages. They may have different, you can certainly learn more by reading JavaScript libraries than anything else in this space.
So, last question for you. I mean, there's a number of projects out there where there seems to be a very strong community around front-end performance.
Yeah.
I mean, why do you think that community has taken root?
I think this is always true for performance in anything. It could be car racing.
That's true.
This is about being a gearhead. And the reality, you get down to it and you write a test and you say, oh, this is true. Well, fortunately, at least on the web is a great big community, and usually when you said something's true and it's controversial, somebody will check it out. And either you're interested in that or you disappear because you realize you've been shamed off the internet or something. But that doesn't happen. Usually what happens is someone might say, oh, actually, you're not testing what you think you're testing. And then somebody's learned something who wrote the original test. Now they make a better test the next time. This is a really great way to learn how to get better at testing. And because you want people to look at what you've done and verify it or not, or debunk it, that's how the community gets growing. You have somebody who discovers, oh my gosh, this is so much faster if you do that. And then somebody else needs to verify that. because it isn't. You may be testing not what you think you're testing.
So the feedback loop, the
feedback
iteration,
loop is
all
critical. Yeah, and if you look at tools like JSPerf, which is one of the things we'll talk about in our talk today, iteration is built into JSPerf. It is the nature of it. You look at a test, you can immediately take that test, copy it, and start editing it. It's not much different than forking on GitHub. This is a popular thing to do because you want to noodle with it, and you want to make sure that it's testing what it says it's testing. So that kind of diving deep, it's in all gearheads.
Right.
And I think it just corresponds really well to web performance, where it is, sometimes it's a black box, or it might feel like it, and it's so fun to dive in and be sure you're right. And then when you are, and it's something that people don't know about, it's really cool.
Right. Well, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate taking the time.